Okay, a first parent question here says, do you feel that your child's ethnicity has an effect on the way they learn? It's a really good question, because given that we have two sons that we've adopted, one who's New Zealand born Fijian and one who's New Zealand born Samoan, but they've both been brought up on a predominantly Western scenario, with a dad who's English and a mum who's Irish. So we've got quite a multicultural dynamic that goes on within our household. If I look at, I think what's been more impacting is that we've brought both of our boys up in the same way, and we've taught them right from when they were very small that your main ways of learning are through really careful observation and through asking lots and lots of questions. Now, our elder child, Elijah, who's our Fijian son, he learned very quickly through his preschool and his early primary school education that asking questions was something that he was not to do, and that adults were not the people to whom he was to go and receive any assistance from, and that the expectations on him were that he wasn't actually capable of learning certain things because they were too hard for him. That's what he was told, and he was dismissed as not being particularly capable, and those things impacted him quite significantly. So the question says, do I think his ethnicity has an effect on the way he learns? I think it has had an effect on how he's been taught, okay, rather than perhaps so much on the way that he learns. He is by nature an observer, a very careful observer, whereas our other son, who is also keenly observant, is much more confident and outgoing in his personality because he didn't have the same preschool and primary messages given to him about learning. Jeremy and I do notice that if we are to look at Elijah's biological family, the extended family, that on the whole, Fijian people I tend to be more retiring by nature, and they will seem to defer a great deal more to Palangi and to what Palangi think. Whereas if we look at Israel, who is our Samoan son, there's much more of a gregarious, outgoing, flamboyant, willing to have a go there, and much more confidence. And so both of the boys actually exhibit those traits, which come through their extended families. We can see that now, how much of that is tied into ethnicity and how much of that is tied into personality and, family traits that are being reproduced by nature, and our boys is debatable. Your next question is, do you expect that your child's teacher recognises their culture, ethnicity? Can I just say that when Elijah did preschool, that his teachers in that particular context appeared to recognise his ethnicity and dismissed his ability. And so he was sealed in terms of what the expectations were of his progress, of his ability to do certain activities. And even when he initiated initially, in those preschool years, asking if he could do it, he was told that it would be too hard for him. But there, in my own ignorance, the context that I had chosen was for a philosophy of education, preschool education, that I actually think has got many merits, But what I didn't think about was the cultural composition of the children. And so in that particular setting, preschool setting, the dominance was, the dominant culture was, dominant cultures I should say, were European or Pākehā and Asian. And he was the only Pacific Island, there were no Māori children, and he was the only Pacific Island child. So I do think that the recognition of his difference that there was, but it felt to me in looking back, and that there was a stereotyping, and there was a ceiling in terms of expectations of what he would and wouldn't be able to achieve. Now the interesting thing is that in that preschool setting, towards the end of it, I mean he only did a year, and he only did 2 sessions a week, so it was a very short space of time that he was actually there. But towards the end of that year, a quite experienced young teacher though from Germany came over, and it was really interesting how she actually recognised right in those last couple of weeks that he was in this particular preschool setting. She was the one who came to me and said, with great, she said, did you know, that Elijah da-da-da-da-da, and I did know that, but the teachers who'd been working with him all year had no idea that he had that sort of knowledge or language or any of those things, because the message he got that everything was too hard for him. Do I expect that when he went to primary school, once again, he was sealed right from the very beginning in terms of what the expectation was of him. I mean, he was looked at as possibly, maybe one day getting a Super 14 contract, because he looks pretty athletic and looks like he might be a rugby player, and that perhaps there might be some musical ability there, but in terms of literacy or mathematical understanding, those sorts of things were not really considered that he would necessarily be going to do very well at.